The bucket of filthy water hit her face at exactly 3 in the morning. Edith gasped, choking on the rancid liquid as it soaked through her threadbare nightgown. Standing over her was Muriel, the head Omega of the Shadowpine pack, her face twisted with contempt. "The Alpha King's heir has been screaming for 2 hours straight," Muriel hissed. "Since you're so worthless you can't even scrub floors properly, maybe you can make yourself useful and shut that pup up before the Alpha has all our heads. If you're already hooked and want to know how a rejected Omega becomes the only person who can calm the future ruler of all werewolves, smash that like button right now and drop a comment telling me the city you're watching from so I can send you a hug. This story gets wild, and you won't believe what happens when the Alpha King discovers the truth." Edith struggled to her feet, water dripping from her tangled brown hair. She was 23 years old and had been at the bottom of the pack hierarchy since birth. No wolf, no shift, no value. Just a human-shaped failure occupying space in a world that worshipped strength and power. The Shadowpine pack had kept her alive out of some ancient obligation to her dead parents, but they made sure she earned every scrap of food, every torn blanket, every breath. "Well," Muriel snapped, "get moving, you useless wretch." Edith didn't argue. She'd learned years ago that arguing only brought more pain. She squeezed water from her hair and followed Muriel through the dark corridors of the pack house. The building was massive, carved from ancient stone and timber, with sections dating back 300 years. The Omegas lived in the basement, in rooms that flooded when it rained and froze during winter. Edith's quarters were the worst, a closet-sized space behind the furnace that reeked of oil and mildew. They climbed 3 flights of stairs. With each step, the screaming grew louder. It wasn't the normal crying of a fussy infant. This was different, desperate, agonized. A sound that made Edith's chest tighten with sympathy despite her own misery. "The healers have tried everything," Muriel said as they reached the royal wing. "Herbs, potions, spells. Nothing works. The pup refuses milk, refuses comfort. Lady Constance is beside herself, and the Alpha King." She trailed off, but her expression said enough. An angry Alpha King meant everyone suffered. The royal nursery was chaos. 3 healers huddled in a corner, faces pale with exhaustion and fear. Lady Constance, the Alpha King's sister, paced by the window, her elegant features haggard. And in the center of it all was an ornate cradle made of silver inlaid oak, where a tiny bundle screamed with a force that seemed impossible for something so small. "What is doing here?" Lady Constance's voice dripped with venom as she spotted Edith. "The Omega might be able to help," Muriel said carefully. "She has a way with wounded animals. Remember last spring when she healed that hawk? My nephew is not a wounded animal." Constance's eyes flashed gold, her wolf rising to the surface. "He is the heir to the Blackthorn throne, the future Alpha King of the Northern Territories. And you bring me this nothing." Edith kept her eyes down, making herself as small as possible. She'd perfected the art of invisibility over the years. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't look anyone in the eye. Don't exist any more than absolutely necessary. The baby's screams intensified, and Constance flinched. "Fine," she spat. "Do whatever. But if you harm one hair on his head, I'll have you flayed alive." Edith approached the cradle slowly. The baby inside was perhaps 6 weeks old, with a shock of black hair and skin flushed red from crying. His tiny fists waved in the air, and his face was contorted in misery. The moment Edith looked at him, something strange happened. Her chest warmed, as if someone had lit a candle behind her ribs. The sensation was so unexpected she almost stepped back. Instead, she reached into the cradle. Every person in the room tensed, ready to stop her if she posed any threat. But Edith simply slid her hands under the baby's small body and lifted him gently. He was surprisingly light, and so warm he almost felt feverish. "Hush now," she whispered, cradling him against her chest. "Hush, little one." The effect was instantaneous. The screaming stopped as if someone had flipped a switch. The baby's eyes, a startling shade of amber, locked onto Edith's face. For a long moment they simply stared at each other. Then, impossibly, the infant smiled. A real, genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. The healers gasped. Lady Constance's mouth fell open. That's not possible," one of the healers breathed. "He's too young to smile. Pups don't smile until at least 2 months, and even then." The baby made a small, contented sound and nestled his face into the crook of Edith's neck. Within seconds, his breathing had evened out. He was asleep. The nursery fell silent except for the crackling of the fire in the hearth. Everyone stared at Edith as if she'd just performed a miracle. She stood frozen, terrified to move in case she woke the baby and unleashed Constance's wrath. "What did you do?" Constance demanded, stepping closer. "What magic is this?" "No magic, my lady," Edith said quietly. "I just held him." "Don't be absurd. The finest healers in the kingdom have been trying to soothe him for hours. Then you, a wolfless omega with no training, no gifts, no—" She stopped abruptly, her nostrils flaring. "Wait." Constance leaned in, sniffing near Edith's shoulder where the baby slept. Her expression transformed from anger to shock to something that looked almost like fear. "Get the Alpha King," she said urgently to one of the healers. "Now." "My lady, it's 4 in the morning. I don't care if it's 4 in the morning or 4 in the afternoon. Get him. Now." The healer scrambled from the room. Edith's heart hammered in her chest. She'd been in the Alpha King's presence exactly twice in her life, both times at a distance during pack assemblies. Lysander Blackthorn was a legend among werewolves, the most powerful alpha in 3 generations, ruthless in battle, brilliant in strategy, and utterly terrifying to anyone who crossed him. He'd united 12 warring packs under his rule and crushed 3 rebellions before his 30th birthday. Now, at 35, he was widowed, raising his heir alone, and reportedly had no patience for incompetence or weakness. In other words, everything Edith represented. "Don't move," Constance ordered. "Don't even breathe too hard." So Edith stood there, arms aching, holding the sleeping prince while the household slowly came alive around them. Servants whispered in the hallways. Guards took up positions outside the nursery. The air grew thick with tension. Then he arrived. Lysander Blackthorn filled the doorway like a storm given human form. He was tall, easily 6'4", with broad shoulders and a warrior's build. His black hair was tied back, revealing a face that was all hard angles and barely controlled power. His eyes were the same amber as his son's, but where the babies held innocence, the Alpha Kings held the weight of 1,000 decisions, 1,000 battles, 1,000 souls under his command. Those eyes swept the room, taking in the scene in an instant, before landing on Edith. She felt the full force of his attention like a physical blow. Her knees wanted to buckle. Her wolf, if she'd had one, would have immediately shown its belly in submission. As it was, she could barely remember to breathe. "Explain," Lysander said. His voice was deep, controlled, but underneath it ran a current of barely leashed violence. This was a man who just had his sleep interrupted and was looking for someone to blame. Constance quickly recounted what had happened. As she spoke, Lysander moved closer to Edith. He circled her slowly, studying her from every angle. It took everything Edith had not to cringe away. The Alpha King's presence was overwhelming, his power pressing against her like a physical weight. "How long has he been asleep?" Lysander asked. "Nearly 15 minutes, brother," Constance replied. "He hasn't stirred once." Lysander reached out and touched his son's head, his large hand gentle despite its obvious strength. The baby sighed in his sleep and burrowed deeper into Edith's embrace. "Put him down," Lysander ordered. Edith's stomach dropped. This was it. She'd somehow offended him, and now she'd pay the price. With trembling hands, she began to lower the baby back into the cradle. The instant she started to pull away, the infant's eyes snapped open. His face crumpled, and he released a wail that rattled the windows. "Pick him up again," Lysander commanded. Edith quickly gathered the baby back into her arms. Once again, he quieted immediately, his small body relaxing against hers. Lysander's expression was unreadable. "Try once more." 3 more times they repeated the experiment. 3 more times, the baby screamed when separated from Edith and calmed the moment she held him again. By the end, everyone in the room understood what this meant, even if no one wanted to say it out loud. "What is your name?" Lysander asked. "Edith, my lord." "Edith Hartley." "Hartley." He frowned, searching his memory. "That name means nothing to me." "No, my lord. My parents were low-ranking pack members. They died when I was young." "And you're wolfless." It wasn't a question, but Edith answered anyway. "Yes, my lord. Yet my son, the heir to the Blackthorn throne, will only sleep in your arms." He said it flatly, as if trying to make sense of an impossible equation. "Constance, get me the answers. I want every healer, every seer, every scholar in the territory working on this. Find out why." "Yes, brother." Lysander turned to Edith again. His gaze pinned her in place. "You will stay here, in the nursery. Until we understand what's happening, you don't leave this room. Is that clear?" "Yes, my lord." "And Edith." He leaned in close, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that only she could hear. "If any harm comes to my son while he's in your care, there won't be anywhere in this world you can hide from me. Do you understand?" Edith's mouth went dry. "Yes, my lord." He studied her for a moment longer, then turned and strode from the room, his presence leaving a vacuum in its wake. The moment he was gone, Edith's legs gave out. She stumbled to the rocking chair in the corner and collapsed into it, the baby still cradled safely in her arms. The prince slept on, oblivious to the chaos he'd caused. Muriel approached cautiously. "Well," she said, her voice tinged with something that might have been satisfaction. "Looks like you're not entirely worthless after all." It was the closest thing to a compliment Edith had ever received from the head Omega. Over the next 3 days, Edith lived in the royal nursery. A small cot was brought in for her, and servants delivered meals at regular intervals. Meals that were a shocking upgrade from the thin gruel she usually ate. She had roasted chicken, fresh bread with butter, vegetable stew rich with herbs, and once, incredibly, a slice of honey cake. It was the best food she'd ever tasted in her life. But she couldn't enjoy any of it because she was living in a state of constant terror. The baby, whose name she learned was Arthur, refused to sleep anywhere except in her arms or lap. If she tried to lay him in his cradle, even for a moment, he'd wake and scream until she picked him up again. This meant Edith slept sitting up in the rocking chair, catching brief naps while Arthur dozed against her chest. The healers came and went, performing tests that involved burning strange herbs, chanting in ancient languages, and examining both Edith and Arthur with instruments she didn't understand. The scholars were no better, asking endless questions about her family history, her childhood, any unusual events in her life. "Have you ever experienced visions?" one ancient scholar asked, peering at her over his spectacles. "No, sir." "Dreams of prophecy?" "No, sir." "Any exposure to divine artifacts? Blessed springs? Sacred groves?" "No, sir. I mostly just scrubbed floors." The scholar sighed and made another note in his massive tome. Lady Constance visited twice daily, her hostility never quite fading even as she began to accept that Edith wasn't going anywhere. On the 3rd day, she arrived with a bundle of clothes. "You can't continue wearing those rags," Constance said, tossing the bundle at Edith. "It's unseemly for someone holding the heir to look like a street beggar." The clothes were simple but infinitely better than what Edith owned. 2 wool dresses in dark colors, a warm shawl, new undergarments, and a pair of soft leather shoes that actually fit. When Edith changed, quickly, while a servant held Arthur and he screamed bloody murder, she almost didn't recognize herself in the mirror. The Alpha King himself came twice. Both times he said nothing, simply stood in the doorway watching his son sleep in Edith's arms. His expression gave away nothing, but Edith could feel the weight of his scrutiny like a blade against her throat. On the fourth day things changed. A messenger arrived while Edith was feeding Arthur, a process she'd learned through trial and error, since the baby would only take a bottle if she was the one holding it. The messenger bowed deeply to Constance. "My lady, the delegation from the Eastern Pax has arrived. The Alpha King requests your presence in the throne room." "Now, we're in the middle of..." Constance glanced at Edith and Arthur, frustration clear on her face. "Fine. Tell my brother I'll be there shortly." After the messenger left, Constance turned to Edith. "You stay here. Don't even think about leaving this room." "Yes, my lady." But an hour later, a servant arrived with a different message. "The Alpha King wants to see his son. You're to bring the baby to the throne room." Terror flooded through Edith. "But Lady Constance said..." "The Alpha King's orders supersede Lady Constance's," the servant said firmly. "Come. Now." So Edith found herself walking through the packhouse with Arthur in her arms, following the servant through corridors she'd only ever seen while cleaning them at dawn. Pack members stopped to stare. Whispers followed in her wake. "Is that the Omega? The one with the prince? She's nobody. Wolfless. How can she?" The throne room was the grandest space in the entire packhouse. Vaulted ceilings stretched 40 feet high, supported by columns carved to look like ancient trees. Tapestries depicting the Blackthorn Pack's history covered the walls. And at the far end, on a raised dais, sat the Alpha King's throne, a massive chair made from the wood of a 1,000-year-old oak, inlaid with silver and crowned with antlers from the largest stag ever hunted in these lands. Lysander sat upon it now, radiating authority. To his right stood Constance. To his left stood a man Edith didn't recognize, though his bearing suggested high rank. And arrayed before the dais were a dozen visiting alphas from the Eastern Pax, all dressed in their finest clothes. Every head turned as Edith entered with the baby. "Ah," Lysander said, his voice carrying through the vast space. "My son." Edith approached slowly, hyper-aware of the dozens of eyes on her. She stopped at the base of the dais and dropped into as low a curtsy as she could manage while holding Arthur. "Alpha King Lysander, you sent for us?" Something flickered in Lysander's eyes. Surprise, maybe, or approval at her proper address. "Yes. My guests wished to see the heir. Alpha Reginald of the Windmere Pack has brought his daughter as a potential match." He wanted to observe Arthur. Edith's stomach sank. Course. The Alpha King would eventually remarry, and Arthur would need a mother. Proper mother. Not a wolfless Omega who existed only because the prince happened to like sleeping in her lap. A young woman stepped forward from among the visiting alphas. She was beautiful, probably 25, with glossy blonde hair and the confident bearing of someone raised in power. Her name was evidently Millicent, and she smiled as she approached. "May I?" she asked, reaching for Arthur. "Of course," Lysander said. Edith had no choice. She began to transfer the baby to Millicent's arms. Arthur woke the moment he left Edith's embrace. His face went from peaceful to panicked in an instant. Then he began to scream. Not just cry. Scream with a ferocity that made several of the visiting alphas flinch. Millicent looked alarmed, bouncing the baby awkwardly. "What's wrong with him?" "Nothing's wrong with him," Constance said quickly. "He's just particular about who holds him." But Arthur wasn't calming down. His screams grew louder, more desperate. His tiny face turned purple from the effort. "Perhaps if I..." Millicent tried a different hold, but Arthur only screamed harder. Lysander's expression darkened. He stood from his throne. "Give him back to the Omega." The moment Arthur was back in Edith's arms, he stopped crying. He gulped air for a few seconds, his body shuddering, then pressed his face into her shoulder and released a long, shaky sigh. The silence in the throne room was deafening. Alpha Reginald cleared his throat awkwardly. "Well, that's unusual. My son has very particular needs at the moment, Lysander said smoothly, though Edith could hear the edge in his voice. A temporary situation the healers are working to resolve. But everyone in that room understood what they'd just witnessed. The future Alpha King, the heir to the most powerful werewolf throne in the north, had rejected a suitable mate candidate in favor of a nobody Omega. The political implications were staggering. The meeting ended quickly after that. The visiting Alphas made their excuses and departed, though not before Edith caught several of them shooting her looks that ranged from curiosity to outright hostility. Millicent, in particular, looked at her with such venom that Edith felt it like a physical touch. When the throne room finally emptied, only Lysander, Constance, and Edith remained. "This is a disaster," Constance said bluntly. "Do you know how that looked? The entire Eastern Territory will be talking about how your heir prefers a wolfless Omega to the daughter of an Alpha." "I'm aware," Lysander said tersely. "We need to fix this. The scholars need to work faster. Find out what's causing this bond and break it." "We're not breaking anything," Lysander snapped. "Arthur is finally sleeping, finally eating. He's thriving. Whatever this is, it's helping him. But at what cost? Your political alliances. Your reputation. I don't care about my reputation. I care about my son." Constance threw up her hands. "You're impossible." She stormed from the room, leaving Edith alone with the Alpha King. The silence stretched between them, broken only by Arthur's soft breathing. Finally, Lysander descended from the dais. He approached Edith slowly, and she forced herself not to back away. When he was close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his amber eyes, he spoke. "Are you frightened of me, Edith?" The honest answer was yes. The diplomatic answer was no. Edith settled for something in between. "I'm aware of your power, my lord." "That's not what I asked." She swallowed hard. "Yes, I'm frightened." "Good." He reached out and gently touched Arthur's head, his son leaning into the touch even in sleep. "Fear will keep you careful. Careful will keep him safe. Do you understand?" "Yes, my lord. I don't know why my son has bonded with you. The scholars can't explain it, the healers can't duplicate it, and every instinct I have says it should be impossible." His gaze locked onto hers, intense enough to steal her breath. "But Arthur is all that remains of my mate. She died bringing him into this world, and I swore on her grave that I would do everything in my power to ensure his safety and happiness. Everything. If that means tolerating an Omega I don't understand holding my son, then so be it." "I would never hurt him," Edith whispered. "I know. Because if you did, even accidentally, I would make you beg for death long before I granted it. Should have been terrifying. It was terrifying." But underneath the threat, Edith heard something else. A father's desperate love for his child. She recognized it because she felt it too. That fierce protective instinct toward Arthur that had bloomed in her chest from the first moment she'd held him. "I understand, my lord." Lysander studied her for a long moment, then nodded curtly. "You're dismissed. Return to the nursery." Edith fled, her heart pounding, Arthur sleeping peacefully in her arms. The next few weeks established a strange new routine. Edith lived in the royal wing now, in a small chamber adjacent to the nursery. It was larger than anywhere she'd ever slept before, with an actual bed, a wardrobe for her new clothes, and a window that looked out over the Pack lands. She took her meals in the nursery, always with Arthur in her lap or arms. She slept when he slept, woke when he woke, and every moment of her day revolved around the tiny prince who refused to let her go. The Pack's attitude toward her shifted. No longer was she ignored or scorned. Now she was whispered about, watched, analyzed. Some Pack members looked at her with curiosity, others with envy, a few with barely concealed hatred. One of those was Muriel. The head Omega visited twice, ostensibly to check on Edith's welfare, but really to deliver thinly veiled threats about not getting above her station. "Don't think this means anything," Muriel hissed during her second visit. "You're still an Omega. Still wolfless. Still worthless. You're just a glorified wet nurse. The moment they figure out how to break whatever spell you've cast on the prince, you'll be back in the basement where you belong." Edith said nothing. She'd learned long ago that arguing with Muriel only made things worse. But privately, she was beginning to understand that her position was more precarious than anyone realized. She wasn't just caring for Arthur. She was standing between powerful people and their ambitions. Every noble family in the territory had dreamed of having their daughter marry the Alpha King or at least serve as governess to his heir. Edith's inexplicable bond with Arthur blocked all of those paths. She was making enemies simply by existing. The first attempt came 3 weeks after she'd moved into the royal wing. Edith had just put Arthur down for his afternoon nap, one of the rare times he'd sleep in his cradle as long as she stayed in the room, when a servant arrived with tea. "Lady Constance thought you might like some refreshment," the servant said, setting down a tray with a teapot and delicate cup. It should have been a kindness. But Edith had learned to be suspicious of kindness. She thanked the servant and waited until she was alone before examining the tea. She didn't know much about poisons, but she knew enough to be cautious. She poured a small amount of tea into the saucer and set it on the windowsill. Within an hour, 3 dead flies lay in the saucer. Edith felt cold all over. Someone had tried to poison her. And if she'd died, Arthur would have been without the only person who could care for him properly. He would have screamed himself into exhaustion or worse. She couldn't tell anyone. Who would believe her? She was nobody, accusing someone in the pack house of attempted murder. They'd say she was paranoid, attention-seeking, or outright lying. So Edith poured the poisoned tea out the window and said nothing. But from that day forward, she accepted no food or drink unless she watched it being prepared. The second attempt was more direct. A week later, Edith was walking through the corridors with Arthur when she felt a sudden push from behind. She stumbled forward, instinctively curling around the baby to protect him as she fell. She hit the ground hard, pain exploding through her shoulder and hip, but Arthur was safe, cushioned by her body. She looked up to see a maid standing over her, eyes wide with mock concern. "Oh, I'm so sorry. I tripped. Are you hurt?" It was a lie. Edith had felt hands deliberately shoving her. But what could she do? Accuse a pack member of assault with no proof. "I'm fine," she managed, climbing to her feet despite the pain. Arthur was fussing now, upset by the sudden movement. The maid's eyes gleamed with something dark. "You should be more careful. The corridors can be dangerous. Especially for someone carrying something so precious." The threat was unmistakable. That night, Edith sat in the rocking chair with Arthur sleeping in her arms and faced a terrible truth. Someone wanted her dead, or at least wanted her removed from the pack house. And she had no allies, no protection, no way to defend herself. She was utterly alone. Except she wasn't. Not entirely. Arthur stirred in his sleep and made a small sound of contentment, his tiny hand gripping her finger. And Edith realized that she did have one ally, even if he was only 6 weeks old. The prince himself. As long as Arthur needed her, she had value. As long as she was necessary to his well-being, she couldn't simply disappear. It wasn't much protection, but it was something. The revelation of what or who was behind the attempts came from an unexpected source. One evening, as Edith was singing softly to Arthur, Lady Constance entered the nursery. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. "We need to talk," Constance said without preamble. Edith immediately tensed. "My lady." Constance poured herself a glass of wine from the sideboard and drank half of it before speaking. "I owe you an apology. I've been harsh with you. Suspicious. I thought perhaps you'd done something to my nephew. Some trick or manipulation to make yourself indispensable. I swear I haven't." "I know." Constance cut her off with a wave of her hand. The scholars finally found something. In the old text, there's a phenomenon called a soul tether. It's incredibly rare. Happens maybe once every few generations. It's when two souls recognize each other as essential to each other's existence. Usually it's between mates, but occasionally it manifests between a guardian and a child. Edith's heart raced. You think that's what this is? It's the only explanation that makes sense. Arthur's soul recognizes yours as safe, as necessary. That's why he won't sleep for anyone else. That's why he needs you. Constance set down her wine glass and looked at Edith directly. Which means you're not going anywhere. Whether I like it or not, you're part of this family now. I don't know what to say. Don't say anything. Just. Constance's expression softened slightly. Just keep him safe. That's all I ask. Arthur is my brother's entire world. If anything happened to him, Lysander would tear the kingdom apart. I will. I promise. Constance nodded, then added quietly. I know someone has been trying to hurt you. The poison tea. The push in the corridor. I've launched an investigation, but I want you to know. You're under my protection now. Anyone who harms you will answer to me personally. It was the first time anyone had ever offered to protect Edith. She felt tears prick her eyes. Thank you, my lady. Don't thank me yet. This bond between you and Arthur means you'll be living in the royal wing, in close proximity to my brother for years. Maybe for the rest of your life. Do you understand the complications that will cause? Edith didn't, not really. But she nodded anyway. Good. Then we understand each other. After Constance left, Edith sat for a long time, processing everything. Soul tether. Her soul was tethered to Arthur's, and his to hers. It explained so much. Not just why he needed her, but why she felt such fierce love for him already. Why the thought of anything harming him made her want to destroy whoever dared try. She looked down at the sleeping prince. His perfect little face peaceful in slumber. What a pair we make, she whispered. A future king and a nobody Omega. The pack must think we're ridiculous. But Arthur just slept on. His small hand still gripping her finger, trusting her completely. The investigation Constance launched bore fruit within 3 days. 2 pack members were exiled. The servant who'd brought the poisoned tea and the maid who'd pushed Edith in the corridor. Both confessed under interrogation that they'd been paid by a rival pack to eliminate Edith and destabilize the Blackthorn heir. The Alpha King himself delivered the news. He came to the nursery late at night, when Arthur was sleeping and Edith was dozing in her chair. She startled awake at his presence, heart racing. Easy, Lysander said, raising a hand. I'm not here to threaten you. Edith relaxed slightly. My lord. He pulled up a chair and sat across from her, a gesture so unexpected that Edith nearly dropped Arthur. The Alpha King didn't sit casually with Omegas. He didn't sit casually with anyone. My sister told you about the soul tether, he said. Yes, my lord. I want you to understand what that means for you. You'll stay in the royal wing. You'll be assigned guards for your protection. You'll receive a stipend and new clothes appropriate to your station. And most importantly, you'll be involved in all decisions regarding Arthur's care and upbringing. Edith's mouth fell open. My lord, I can't. I'm not qualified to. You're soul tethered to my son. That makes you more qualified than anyone. He leaned forward, his intense gaze pinning her in place. I'm not asking you to be his mother. That position belonged to my mate, and it died with her. But you'll be his guardian, his protector, his comfort. Do you accept this responsibility? It wasn't really a question, but Edith answered anyway. Yes, my lord. I accept. Good. He stood then paused. One more thing. Call me Lysander when we're alone. Not Alpha King, not my lord. Just Lysander. If we're to work together raising my son, we need to be able to speak frankly. Yes, my lord. I mean yes, Lysander. A hint of a smile ghosted across his face. Better. Good night, Edith. Good night. After he left, Edith sat in stunned silence. Her entire life had changed in the span of 3 weeks. From worthless Omega to guardian of the heir. From sleeping in a closet to living in the royal wing. From starving to having more food than she could eat. It was like a fairy tale. Except fairy tales didn't include poison attempts and political machinations and soul tethers that bound you to an infant prince for life. Arthur stirred in her arms, making a small questioning sound. Edith adjusted him gently, and he settled back into sleep. "I've got you," she whispered to him. "No matter what comes, I've got you." And she meant it. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever enemies emerged from the shadows, whatever complications arose from her impossible bond with the heir, Edith would face them. Because Arthur needed her. And strangely, wonderfully, terrifyingly, she needed him too. The months that followed were a period of adjustment. Edith slowly learned to navigate pack politics, aided by Lady Constance who, while never warm, at least stopped treating her with open hostility. She learned which pack members could be trusted and which viewed her with suspicion or jealousy. She learned the protocols of court, the proper way to address visiting dignitaries, and how to fade into the background when important discussions took place. But most importantly, she learned Arthur. She learned that he liked being sung to in the early morning but preferred silence at night. She learned that he hated the scratchy wool blankets but loved the soft cotton ones. She learned his different cries: hungry cry, tired cry, uncomfortable cry, scared cry, and how to respond to each one. And Arthur grew. At 2 months he could hold his head up. At 3 months he began to laugh, a sound so pure and joyful it made everyone who heard it smile. At 4 months, he could grab objects and bring them to his mouth, exploring everything with intense curiosity. Through it all, Edith was there. Always there. The soul tether that bound them meant she could feel when something was wrong, even before Arthur cried. If he was getting sick, she knew. If he was having a nightmare, she woke instantly. Their connection deepened with every passing day until Edith couldn't imagine her life without the small prince who had transformed her from worthless to invaluable. But not everyone was pleased with this arrangement. The winter solstice celebration brought dozens of visiting packs to the Blackthorn territory. It was the most important social event of the year, where alliances were forged, marriages were arranged, and political power was displayed like plumage. Edith tried to stay out of the way, remaining in the nursery with Arthur while the celebrations raged below. But on the 3rd night of festivities, Lysander summoned her. "The visiting alphas want to meet Arthur," he explained when she arrived at his study, the baby in her arms as always. "It's tradition. They'll present gifts, offer blessings, that sort of thing." "Of course," Edith said, though her stomach churned with anxiety. "You'll accompany us. Stay close to me. Some of these alphas, they're not pleased about your position here." "I understand." What Edith didn't understand was just how hostile some of these alphas would be. The moment she entered the great hall with Arthur and Lysander, she felt the weight of 100 stares. Most were merely curious, but some were openly hostile. She recognized a few faces from that disastrous first meeting, including Millicent and her father, Alpha Reginald. The gift presentations went smoothly at first. Alphas approached the dais where Lysander sat, offered elaborate presents for Arthur, and exchanged pleasantries. Edith stood to the side, trying to be invisible while holding the very visible heir to the throne. Then Alpha Reginald stepped forward with Millicent at his side. "Alpha King Lysander," Reginald began, his voice carrying through the hall, "I bring gifts for your son, but also a concern that weighs heavily on my heart." Lysander's expression remained neutral. "Speak freely, Alpha Reginald. It's about the Omega." Reginald gestured toward Edith without looking at her. "My daughter was raised to be a queen, trained in politics, combat, and leadership. Yet she was rejected by your heir in favor of a wolfless nobody. This sends a troubling message to all the packs. That bloodlines don't matter. That strength doesn't matter. That anyone, no matter how lowborn, can claim a place beside the throne." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Edith felt her face burn with humiliation, but she kept her eyes down and held Arthur tighter. Lysander stood slowly, and the murmurs died instantly. When he spoke, His voice was soft but carried an edge of steel. Are you questioning my judgment, Alpha Reginald? I'm questioning the precedent you're setting. This Omega has bewitched your son somehow. Enough. The single word cracked like a whip. My son is soul-tethered to Edith Hartley. This is not some trick or manipulation. It's a bond recognized by every scholar and healer in my territory. A bond so rare that most wolves live their entire lives without witnessing one. My son's soul chose her. And I will not have you or anyone else insulting that choice. The hall was dead silent. Alpha Reginald's face flushed red, but he couldn't argue. To question a soul tether was to question the will of fate itself. Furthermore, Lysander continued, his amber eyes sweeping across the assembled alphas, let me be clear to everyone here. Edith Hartley is under my personal protection. She is Arthur's guardian, and she will remain in that position for as long as the soul tether exists. Anyone who harms her, threatens her, or plots against her will answer to me. Not to my guards, not to my court, to me personally. Are there any questions? No one spoke. Good. Then let's continue with the celebrations. The tension in the hall was palpable, but the gift presentations resumed. Edith's hands shook as she held Arthur, overwhelmed by what had just happened. Lysander had defended her. Publicly. In front of the most powerful alphas in the Northern Territories. Later that night, after Arthur was asleep and the celebrations had wound down, Lysander came to the nursery. He looked exhausted, still wearing his formal clothes from the evening. Thank you, Edith said quietly. For what you said. I spoke the truth. He moved to the window, staring out at the moonlit grounds. But I also made you more of a target. Every alpha in that hall now understands that the best way to hurt me is through Arthur. And the best way to hurt Arthur is through you. Edith's blood ran cold. I hadn't thought of it that way. That's why I'm increasing your security. 2 guards will be with you at all times when you leave the royal wing. And I'm teaching you basic self-defense. Me. I can't fight. I don't have a wolf. Which is why you need to learn. He turned to face her, his expression serious. You're vulnerable, Edith. And vulnerability in this world gets people killed. I won't let that happen to you, which means you need to be able to protect yourself. Okay. If you think it's necessary. I do. He moved toward the door then paused. And Edith. For what it's worth, Arthur chose well. You're stronger than you know. He left before she could respond, leaving her alone with her thoughts and the sleeping prince. The self-defense training began the next morning. Lysander himself taught her, which caused its own scandal, the Alpha King personally training a wolfless Omega. But he ignored the whispers and gossip, putting Edith through her paces in a private training room. It was brutal. Edith had no fighting instincts, no natural strength, and no stamina. The first week, she could barely last 15 minutes before collapsing, gasping for air. Lysander was patient but relentless, drilling her on basic blocks, strikes, and evasion techniques. You'll never overpower an opponent, he explained during one session. So we're teaching you to escape, to create distance, to survive long enough for help to arrive. What if help doesn't arrive? Edith asked, dodging another of his controlled strikes. Then you do whatever you must to protect Arthur. Because that's what this is really about. If someone comes for you, they're coming for him. And I know you'd die before letting anyone harm him. He was right. Edith realized with startling clarity that she absolutely would die for Arthur. The soul tether had bound them so completely that his life mattered more than her own. Good, Lysander said, clearly reading her expression. Hold on to that feeling. That's what will keep you alive when nothing else will. Months passed. Arthur celebrated his first birthday with a grand party that drew wolves from across the kingdom. He took his first steps at 13 months, tottering across the nursery into Edith's waiting arms while Lysander watched with undisguised pride. He spoke his first word at 14 months, not Deda or Mama, but D, his attempt at saying Edith's name. Lysander had laughed, a rare genuine laugh, and said, Of course. Of course his first word would be your name. But despite the joy of watching Arthur grow, tension continued to build within the pack and beyond. The other alphas hadn't forgotten the winter solstice incident. Some began to openly question Lysander's leadership, suggesting that his attachment to a wolfless Omega showed weakness. Others used it as an excuse to withhold support for his policies or delay sending troops when border disputes arose. Lady Constance warned Edith about it one afternoon while they watched Arthur play with his wooden toys. "My brother is the most powerful alpha in 3 generations," Constance said quietly. "But even his power has limits. If enough alphas unite against him, if they decide his judgment is compromised because of you and Arthur, what would happen?" Edith asked. "Challenge. Single combat for the right to rule. It's the oldest law we have. Any alpha who believes the current ruler is unfit can issue a formal challenge. And if Lysander loses..." Constance's expression darkened. "He won't lose. But the challenger might demand concessions. The removal of certain influences from court, for example." Edith understood immediately. "They'd demand he get rid of me." "Yes. Which is why we need to be careful. Very careful. No mistakes, no scandals, nothing that can be used as ammunition against my brother." But fate had other plans. The scandal came from an unexpected quarter. One of the visiting alphas, a young wolf named Clarence who'd shown Edith kindness during his stay, was found in the gardens late one night. With him was a letter, a love letter addressed to Edith, expressing his admiration and asking for a secret meeting. The letter was a forgery. Edith had never encouraged Clarence, had barely spoken to him beyond polite greetings. But the damage was done. Word spread through the pack like wildfire. The Omega Guardian was conducting secret romances, was perhaps planning to run away, was definitely not the innocent victim everyone had believed. Clarence was hauled before Lysander, where he swore he'd been given the letter by someone claiming to be Edith's friend. But he couldn't identify who, and the investigation went nowhere. The real consequence came 3 days later, when Alpha Reginald formally challenged Lysander for the throne. The challenge grounds were ancient, a stone circle in the forest where alphas had settled disputes for 1,000 years. Every pack member gathered to witness, along with representatives from the visiting packs. Edith stood at the front with Arthur in her arms. Lysander had insisted she be present, though she desperately wanted to be anywhere else. The rules were simple. The 2 alphas would fight in their wolf forms until one submitted or died. The winner would lead the Blackthorn pack and, by extension, control the northern territories. "If I fall," Lysander had told Edith that morning, "take Arthur and run. There's a safe house in the mountains. Constance knows where. Go there and wait." "You won't fall," Edith had said with more confidence than she felt. Now, watching Lysander strip off his shirt and prepare to shift, Edith prayed she was right. The transformation was always impressive, but watching an Alpha King shift was something else entirely. One moment Lysander stood there in human form, and the next, a massive black wolf stood in his place. He was easily twice the size of a normal wolf, with eyes that glowed amber and fangs that could tear through steel. Alpha Reginald shifted as well, his wolf form brown and slightly smaller but still formidable. The fight began. It was brutal and swift. The 2 wolves circled each other, then collided with a force that shook the ground. Teeth and claws flashed in the sunlight. Blood spattered the ancient stones. The crowd roared with bloodlust, the primal part of their nature responding to the display of dominance. Reginald was skilled, Edith had to admit. He landed several solid hits, drawing blood from Lysander's shoulder and flank. But Lysander was something more than skilled. He was a force of nature, each movement calculated and devastating. When he finally got his jaws around Reginald's throat, the challenge was effectively over. Reginald submitted, exposing his belly in the ultimate gesture of defeat. Lysander held him there for a long moment, asserting his dominance, then released him. Both alphas shifted back to human form, panting and bloodied. Does anyone else question my right to rule? Lysander's voice rang out across the challenge grounds. Silence answered him. Then we're done here. Reginald, take your pack and leave my territory. You have until sunset. It should have been a moment of triumph. Lysander had defended his throne, proved his strength, and silenced his critics. But as Edith watched him stride from the circle, blood streaming from his wounds, she felt only dread. Because she knew this wasn't over. Someone had forged that letter. Someone had pushed Reginald to challenge. Someone wanted Lysander off the throne or, at the very least, wanted Edith removed from Arthur's side. And whoever it was, they were still out there, plotting their next move. That night, after the healers had tended to Lysander's wounds and Arthur was asleep, Edith found herself unable to rest. She sat in the window seat of her chamber, staring out at the moonlit forest, trying to make sense of everything. A knock at her door made her jump. "It's me," Lysander's voice called softly. Edith opened the door to find the Alpha King standing there in casual clothes. His shoulder bandaged but otherwise looking recovered. She'd never seen him in anything but formal attire. It made him seem almost normal. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. "No. I keep thinking about everything that happened. The letter, the challenge, all of it. May I come in?" It was inappropriate. A male alpha in an unmated female's bedroom at night was scandalous under any circumstances. But Edith stepped aside anyway, and Lysander entered, moving to the window seat she'd just vacated. "I know who forged the letter," he said without preamble. Edith's heart stuttered. "Who?" "Muriel, the head Omega. She was working with Reginald, hoping that if he won the challenge and took over the pack, he'd elevate her position. She wanted revenge for you, replacing her as the most influential Omega in the pack house." Rage, pure and hot, flooded through Edith. Muriel had tormented her for years, and even after everything had changed, she was still trying to destroy her. "What did you do to her?" "Exiled. She left an hour ago, escorted to the border with orders never to return on pain of death." It was petty to feel satisfied by someone else's suffering, but Edith couldn't help it. Muriel had tried to ruin her life one too many times. "There's something else," Lysander continued, his gaze fixed on the forest beyond the window. "The challenge today made me realize something. I've been thinking of Arthur's upbringing in terms of survival. Keep him alive, keep him safe. But that's not enough. He needs to be strong. Strong enough that when he takes the throne, no one will dare challenge him the way they challenge me." "He's only a year old," Edith said gently. "There's time. Time passes faster than you think." Lysander finally looked at her, and there was something vulnerable in his expression that she'd never seen before. "Will you help me? Not just as his guardian, but as his teacher. Help me raise him to be the kind of alpha who doesn't need to constantly prove his worth through violence. I don't know anything about being an alpha. But you know about being underestimated. About surviving when everyone expects you to fail. About finding strength in places others don't think to look." He stood and moved closer to her, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his amber eyes. "Arthur will need those lessons. The traditional alpha training will teach him to fight and lead. But you can teach him empathy, resilience, and how to see value in people others dismiss. Will you do it?" Put that way, how could she refuse? "Yes, I'll help you raise him." Lysander smiled, a real smile, not the political mask he wore in court. "Thank you, Edith." He left then, leaving Edith alone with her racing thoughts. She just agreed to help raise the future Alpha King. A year ago, she'd been scrubbing floors and sleeping in a closet. Now she was shaping the future of the kingdom. Life, she decided, was utterly insane. The next few years passed in a blur of growth and change. Arthur grew from a toddler into a bright, curious child. At 3, he could recite the names of all the major packs. 4, he began basic combat training. At 5, he started his formal education with the pack scholars. Through it all, Edith was there, balancing her role as guardian with her promise to Lysander. She taught Arthur about kindness, showing him how to treat the lowest pack members with the same respect as the highest. She taught him about resilience, sharing stories of how she'd survived her own difficult childhood. And perhaps most importantly, she taught him that strength came in many forms. "Why don't you have a wolf, Dee?" Arthur asked one day when he was 5. They were in the gardens, Arthur practicing his letters while Edith worked on mending his clothes. "I was born without one," Edith explained. "Some people are. It doesn't make me less than anyone else, just different. But Father says wolves are what make us strong." "Your father is right. Wolves do make us strong. But there are other kinds of strength too. Strength of will. Strength of heart. Strength to keep going even when things are hard." Arthur considered this seriously. "You're strong, Dee. You're the strongest person I know besides Father." Edith's throat tightened with emotion. "Thank you, sweetheart. When I'm Alpha King, I'm going to make sure everyone knows you're strong. Even if you don't have a wolf." He said it with such fierce conviction that Edith had to blink back tears. This child, this beautiful soul who'd saved her from a life of misery, was promising to defend her honor when he grew up. "I love you, Arthur," she said softly. "I love you too, Dee." But not everyone was pleased with Edith's influence over the young prince. As Arthur grew older and his personality developed, kind, thoughtful, surprisingly diplomatic for a child, some pack members began to mutter that he was too soft, too influenced by his wolfless guardian. The complaints came to a head when Arthur was 6. A group of visiting alpha pups, sons of neighboring pack leaders, came for a week of training and socialization. Arthur was expected to assert his dominance, to prove himself the strongest among them. Instead, Arthur befriended them. He shared his toys, helped the smaller pups when they struggled with training exercises, and organized cooperative games instead of competitive fights. The other alphas were appalled. "Your son will be eaten alive," Alpha Percival told Lysander bluntly over dinner. "He's too gentle, too accommodating. Alphas need to dominate, not befriend." Lysander's expression remained neutral. "Arthur is 6 years old. There's plenty of time for him to develop his dominance. By then it might be too late. That Omega has made him weak." This time Lysander's eyes flashed gold. "Watch your words, Percival. I'm speaking truth. Everyone can see it. The boy spends more time with her than with you. She's teaching him to be soft, to value feelings over strength. Is that the kind of Alpha King you want leading the Northern Territories?" "I want," Lysander said slowly, dangerously, "an Alpha King who can unite the packs through wisdom and strategy, not just brute force. An Alpha King who inspires loyalty instead of demanding it through fear. If that makes him soft in your eyes, then perhaps your eyes need examining." The dinner ended in tense silence. Later that night, Lysander came to find Edith in the library, where she was reading to Arthur before bed. He waited until the story was finished and Arthur was drowsy before speaking. "Can we talk in private?" Edith's stomach dropped, but she nodded. She tucked Arthur into his bed in the adjoining room and returned to find Lysander staring into the fireplace. "They're right," he said without looking at her. "Not about everything but about some of it. Arthur is too sheltered. I've been letting you raise him your way, teaching him kindness and empathy because those are good qualities. But I've neglected the other side. The alpha side. The side that needs to be ruthless when necessary, decisive in battle, willing to make hard choices." "So what are you saying?" Edith asked, fear creeping into her voice. "That I'm doing it wrong." "No, you're doing it perfectly. But it's not enough." He finally looked at her, and the conflict in his expression was clear. "I need to take a more active role. Arthur needs to spend more time with me, learning the things I can teach him. Which means less time with you." Felt like a knife to the chest. Edith had known this day would come eventually. Arthur couldn't remain a child forever, couldn't stay attached to her apron strings. But she hadn't expected it to hurt this much. "I understand," she managed.